Paul would not have many friends today with the words that is written in 1 Timothy chapter 2. In fact, in this particular culture, I have no doubt about it that Paul would have been canceled. In fact, there's some that want to dig up the Apostle Paul right now and burn his bones for what he has said about sisters. But they fail to see the pivot of the Apostle Paul. In verse number 15, verse 12 through 15 in particular, the Apostle Paul has given these instructions to the local church. Notice what he says in verse number 12, but I do not allow women to teach or exercise authority over a man, but to remain quiet. In verse number 13, for it was Adam who was first created and then Eve. And then in verse number 14, and it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Couple that with what he says in verse number 11, that a woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. And now we understand why the culture would want to cancel a man like the Apostle Paul. After all, there is a push for equality today. But the Apostle Paul not only does not back away from the ledge, as he tells the sisters in the church to learn in submissiveness and to not exercise authority over a man. But he says in verse 13 and 14, doubling down, he appeals to a creation ordinance. Notice what he says here. He says that it was Adam who was what? Created, and then Eve. And then in verse number 14, it was the Apostle Paul who said, and it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Now let me make this caveat here. Eve was deceived. Adam went into this sin with his eyes wide open. The serpent deceived Eve, but Adam knew better. Eve was deceived and Adam was delusional for thinking that he could disobey God and that nothing would happen to him. Nothing of the consequences that God gave him would happen to him. In fact, it is the Apostle Paul who says as much in Romans chapter 5, where Paul is talking about how sin entered into the world. He does not say that sin entered into the world through Eve. Eve was deceived, but sin entered into the world through our first father, Adam.